Hello and welcome to American Wasp. It is Thursday, July 10th. I am your host, Deter McBusiness, coming to you from the left coast, talking to you about national politics from a progressive perspective. And today is going to be a little bit of off the beaten track kind of content. I'm just going to kind of make it up as I go until I get some people in chat and they give me some things to talk about. For now, let's get to know an ancient Native American Paramount Chief, Powhatan, who was the head honcho of the Indians, and I guess it's okay to call them Indians because George Carlin has a good video that everyone should check out. So I have not seen this, but I have an ancestor who served as an interpreter for Powhatan to the Jamestown colonists. And he went and lived with Powhatan and his family for 3 years to learn their customs and become a translator. And he went back and forth and basically facilitated trade between the colonists and the local Indians. So here we go. Here's some information on Powhatan.
Many great leaders have shaped the history of Senecomica, but the most widely known is likely Paramount Chief Powhatan. If you've ever seen Disney's Pocahontas, you have already been introduced to him as her middle-aged father who begins the children's movie distrustful of the Jamestown colonists, but is convinced by his daughter to make peace with the Englishmen by the time the credits roll. As you can likely suspect, the real Paramount Chief Powhatan was a much more dynamic and complex person. So, who was the real Paramount Chief Powhatan then? Paramount Chief Powhatan was born in the town of Powhatan, near the falls of the James River. His personal name was actually Wahan Seneca, with Powhatan being more akin to a nickname. He held the title of Paramount Chief, or Memanitowoc, meaning he ruled over many tribes and towns in Senecomica. Historically, his paramount chiefdom has sometimes been called the Powhatan Confederacy, but it is important to remember that, unlike a confederacy which is a collection of sovereign groups united under common purpose, Paramount Chief Powhatan had supreme control over his territories. He inherited 6 tribes from his mother, as power was passed matrilineally, meaning through one's mother's lineage, which were the territories of Powhatan, Arahatic, Appomattox, Pamunkey, Yautanan, and Mattapanine. Over the following years, though, Paramount Chief Powhatan grew his territories through diplomacy, coercion, and force to between 30 and 35 tribes, stretching at times from around modern-day Washington, D.C. to North Carolina. Senecomica borders groups to the east and south, such as the Monacan, Nottoway, and Tuscaroras peoples. Paramount Chief Powhatan was described by Englishmen who met him as, quote, a tall, well-proportioned man with a sour look, his head somewhat gray, his beard so thin that it seems none at all, his age nearly 60, of a very able and hardy body to endure any labor. Another Englishman who never personally met Paramount Chief Powhatan described him as, quote, a goodly old man, not yet shrinking, of a tall stature and clean limbs, of a sad aspect, round fat visage, with grey hairs, but plain and thin hanging upon his broad shoulders, some few hairs upon his chin, and so on his upper lip. He hath been a strong and able man, sinewy, active, and of a daring spirit, vigilant, ambitious, subtle to enlarge his dominions. Cruel hath he been, and querulous as with his own werewants for trifles, as also with his neighbors in the younger days, though now delighted in security and pleasure, and therefore stands upon reasonable conditions of peace with all the great and absolute foreign chiefs about him, and is likely more quietly settled among his own. When relying on English descriptions, we must care for biases and misconceptions that exist, but from these accounts it seems clear that the English first met Paramount Chief Powhatan later in his life, but that he still maintained the prowess and physique of a strong leader. He had maintained his paramount chiefdom for decades up until that point through a constant process of warfare, intimidation, redistribution of wealth, and family alliances. After acquiring a new territory, he would appoint a new chief called a werewance or a werewansqua, depending on their gender, and keep their favor through constant threat of either being demoted or through gifting them status items such as copper and other niceties. Paramount Chief Powhatan required tribute to be paid to him, which could be in the form of copper, luxury goods such as pearls, rare shells, or bone jewelry, dyed stuffs like puccoon, which was used to produce a red pigment, or food and nice furs. Tribute would be passed from the people to their town werewance or werewansqua, then to their tribe's werewance or werewansqua, and ultimately up to Paramount Chief Powhatan. According to an English author, each territory was required to present 8/10 of what the land produced, but this seems pretty high. This number may actually represent the total tribute received by a lesser leader, which was then passed up the chain of command. Even though Paramount Chief Powhatan collected tribute, he seems to have lived much like a typical Powhatan man, hunting for his family and even wearing less opulent clothing and ornamentation when there were not important duties to attend to as Memanitowoc. It is difficult to talk about Paramount Chief Powhatan without talking about his famous daughter, Pocahontas. Although she is portrayed in the Disney movie as his only daughter, Paramount Chief Powhatan likely had many children, just as he also had many wives. Unfortunately, many are not named, apart from his alleged favorite wife, Winganuske, another wife named Oholask, sons named Wakatanau and Nantaquad, or Nakaquawis, and daughters named Matachana and Cleopatra, although the English likely poorly recorded her actual name and it's not, in fact, Cleopatra. Whether or not Paramount Chief Powhatan would have called Pocahontas his favorite daughter, though, in English accounts, Pocahontas does seem to have a lot of personality, which solidified her as a prominent figure in English writings. Paramount Chief Powhatan unfortunately died in April 1618, making him around 70 to 80 years old by English estimates. Nothing is known about where he died, what caused his death, or who was with him when he passed. Archaeologists still have not found any evidence of where he was buried. We hope you liked this video, and it's shown you who Paramount Chief Powhatan was in a little more detail and cleared up some common misconceptions and myths about him and his
Not
Paramount
exactly the
chiefdom.
most
Don't forget to like this video and
comprehensive video. Let's go to this one.
Powhatan was the name of both a powerful Native American chief or king and the confederacy he ruled at the time of the arrival of English colonists in Virginia in 1607. Powhatan reigned over several thousand people who initially helped the English survive, especially during the harsh winter weather when food was scarce. Chief Powhatan, whose name more properly was Wahun Senakau, or a variation thereof, was born around 1545 and died in 1618. The Powhatan Confederacy got its name from him. Virtual Jamestown on the web states, as the English saw him, Powhatan was an tall, well-proportioned man, with a sour look who ruled with an iron hand. Few doubt his word was law, and he did hold life and death powers over his many subjects. Powhatan ruled a federation of about 30 Algonquian-speaking tribes throughout an area of approximately 6,000 square miles, 15,540 square kilometers. Powhatan people grew corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters that grew in symbiosis. The bean vines grew on the cornstalks, and the low-growing squash controlled the weeds. They also grew other vegetables. The men hunted and fished, and the women farmed and gathered wild plant foods. The women also made clothing from animal skins. The Powhatan made their homes out of sapling frames covered with reed mats or tree bark. They made their tools from stone, bones, and wood, and later obtained firearms and other metal implements from the English. They traded over an extensive network, both within their nation and with outside tribes. HistoryIsFun.org says, in a ranked society of rulers, great warriors, priests, and commoners, status was determined by achievement, often in warfare, and by the inheritance of luxury goods like copper, shell beads, and furs.
So for those of you just joining us, this is a little bit of my family history. An ancestor of mine was a translator for the English settlers in Jamestown, Virginia, and he went and lived with Powhatan, who was the chief of the entire Algonquin nation, or the Powhatan Confederacy, but they all spoke different variations of Algonquin. Anyway, just thought I'd throw some random stuff up while we get some people in, and would love to hear your questions in chat. We can tangent over to whatever you guys want to talk about. But for now, this guy is one of the most important, if not the most important figure in Native American history.
Those of higher status had larger homes, more wives, and elaborate dresses. The Powhatans worshipped a hierarchy of gods and spirits. They offered gifts to Oke to prevent him from sending them harm. Ahone was the creator and giver of good things. The Powhatan Confederacy was at peace with the English at first, then they clashed with them. There was peace following Powhatan's daughter Pocahontas' marriage to a colonist, but the war would break out again, leading to a period of intermittent fighting until 1676. Powhatan was a powerful chief, according to biography.com. He ruled about 6 tribes, including his own Powhatan, the Pamunkey, Arohatek, Appomattox, Yoktanand, and Mattaponi. Through both war and alliances, he came to rule about 30 tribes, each with its chief called a werowance. These sub-chiefs answered Powhatan, paid him tribute, and their men fought alongside his warriors when necessary. It is unknown when Powhatan became king, but he was in charge when the colonists arrived in April 1607. He sent an ambassador to seek peace and helped the newcomers with food after the harvest. Without that help, it is questionable whether the English colony would have survived. In the winter of 1607, the Indians captured English Captain John Smith and brought him before Powhatan in his capital of Werowocomoco, where they kept him over the winter. He later wrote that Pocahontas saved his life, though biography says this may be an exaggeration. Powhatan released Smith the next year, but he returned seeking food and help for his people.
So I can give you guys some color on that, because that's pretty famous, that Pocahontas saved John Smith's life. What was probably going on was some sort of theatrical presentation by the Native Americans where a man would be mockingly killed, and except right before he was about to be killed, a woman would step in and be his sponsor and save him. And they did. When John Smith's turn came, Pocahontas stepped in and was the figurative sponsor that saved him. So it was probably not like that dramatic where she saved his life, but it was probably, like most things are and almost always are in Greek tragedies, it was a misunderstanding, but it went in the positive direction. Oh, we got some chat here. Hold on a second. Latina Mufene. Yesterday you said to the prevalence of guns, you wouldn't be for a stateless structure of governance. I would like to point out you can still have law enforcement agencies without a state. Okay, great. Yeah, as far as where the evolution of American government goes, that type of argument, socialism into communism, would be oh, wait a second, sorry. The argument, all those arguments would take place after we get a lot more things. So for those just joining us, this is what I'm responding to. The absence of a state, which is the ultimate goal of communism. I don't know. I mean, that's 10 steps ahead of where we are now. So I don't really get caught into the ideology conversations as much as, and I think they're a distraction. And you can tell me in the chat if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure all the isms that we love to talk about in this country were conceived of outside the context of an interdependent global economy. That's my understanding, is that all the theoreticians that came up with these labels for different styles of government did so with ignorance, because they could not have predicted what would happen after the world got over imperialism, or at least relatively so. So let's see. Yeah, I like that the best. So keep it coming in the chat. Till then, I'm going to get back to my proud ancestry. For those just joining us, my ancestor was a translator for Powhatan, who was the most powerful Native American chief probably ever.
Powhatan agreed to give food in exchange for weapons to fight his enemies, but the colonists continued to encroach on native territory, aggravating the two sides' differences. Powhatan moved to a new village and made it his capital to distance himself from the English, who wanted to make him a subject of the English king. In November 1609, Powhatan lured some colonists to his new capital under the pretense of trade, but attacked and killed most of them. The Encyclopedia Virginia Online states, in November 1609, Powhatan invited a party of about 30 colonists, led by John Ratcliffe, to Orapax on the promise of a store of corn. The English were ambushed and killed. Ratcliffe himself was tortured to death. Powhatan's men, on the Paramount chief's orders, took every opportunity to kill English stragglers and to steal what they could from the fort. Powhatan then cut trade ties and ordered all who left the Jamestown fort would be attacked by Indian warriors. The settlers were in difficult straits until new supplies and leadership arrived from England in the summer of 1610. With reinforcements, the English began to attack the tribes. Colonists captured Pocahontas in 1613 or 1614, accounts vary. She lived among the English, who demanded a return of their people captured in raids. Powhatan did return some colonists, but he did not comply with a return of the weapons the Indians had stolen, so Pocahontas remained a captive. Not long after her capture, she became a Christian and married colonist John Rolfe. That marital alliance between an Indian princess and a colonist brought peace for the rest of Powhatan's life until 1618. The peace was not to last, though. Biography.com states, after traveling to England with her husband, Pocahontas died there in 1617.
So sad. She died like 3 years after she got married, and Pocahontas is a tragic figure. I don't know how Disney pulled off an animated feature about Pocahontas, because it's really sad what happened to her, considering how good of a person she sounded like.
Powhatan died soon after, in April 1618, in territory that is now part of Virginia. Powhatan was succeeded by his brother Opeechapam, and then
Opeechapam was a bad dude. That brings about the next war, and he couldn't wait. It took him a couple years to strategize, but he got he was waiting his turn to get after the English colonists.
Then by another brother, Opechancanough. Under Opechancanough, war with the colonists would begin again. Powhatan was an impressive ruler who had amassed a great deal of power and influence before the arrival of the Jamestown colonists upended his way of life. He ably countered their actions, but numbers and weaponry were not on Powhatan's side for long. Pocahontas visited England with her husband and young son Thomas in 1616. Their mission was to recruit new settlers. Pocahontas met John Smith, who had been an early settler in the New World. She told him she would be, forever and ever, your countryman. In March 1617, just as they were about to return, Pocahontas died. John Rolfe returned to Virginia, having been appointed secretary of the colony. Thomas returned to Virginia in the 1630s, but by then his father and Powhatan were both dead. The truce had been broken since 1622, when Pocahontas' uncle, Opechancanough, led a bloody uprising. Diseases and warfare killed many natives of the Powhatan Confederacy. There was intermittent fighting until 1676. Britannica says, long-standing conflicts with the Iroquois were ended by a treaty in 1722, but the greatly reduced Powhatan population continued to decline. Those on the eastern shore of Virginia, who had long intermarried with free and enslaved Africans, were driven off in 1831 during the disturbances caused by a slave rebellion led by Nat Turner. There are now an estimated 2,000 Powhatan Indians.
2,000 Powhatan Indians left. That's it. All right, let's get back to Latino Mafune. Let me know if I'm pronouncing anything. I agree. Here, let me get this right. I agree that if the abolition of the state is long-term historical project, and we have to address a number of issues first. Either way, must be better at building transnational political projects. Yeah, I mean that's the New Deal type of politics that I'm calling for, that a lot of people on the left are calling for. It's not terribly original, where you're just going to an historical landmark that is FDR's Bill of Rights: healthcare, housing, education, employment, farmers' rights, and Social Security. So we have to get into problems and solutions. The big thing that we just learned from Zoran's campaign is to stay away from the isms and just get into problems and solutions. People keep talking, we got to talk about kitchen table issues and meet people where they are. Well, what does that all mean? What does that all mean? It means talking problems and solutions. Thank you, Latino Mafune. Yeah, pronunciation is tough for me sometimes. Like Powhatan, for example, might have been pronounced Powhatan, but I like to think it was Powhatan because it's such a great name. I mean, everybody needs to know who Powhatan was, because the Native Americans in colonial America were surprisingly well organized. Okay, here we go. How can we be better at making Native American issues more visible in the public dialogue? It takes a freak show lefty to get into a position where they could make Native American issues more visible. I mean, there just aren't that many of them, and they're isolated to the territories. They don't want to be part of, a lot of them either don't want to be part of the white man's America, or they just would rather be with their tribe, or they just got screwed over and have no way out. That's probably the most prolific reason. But they don't represent a big enough voting bloc. There aren't enough of them. Other minorities are bigger and stronger. So, but anyway, back to Powhatan. So for those of you just joining us, my ancestor was a translator for this big Paramount chief named Powhatan, who traded and basically saved the settlers of Jamestown, Virginia. But he also went to war with them, and I'm trying to figure out whose fault it was. I'm trying to figure out if it was the English colonialists, or if it was Powhatan and his warriors, or if it was some other variable that we can't really think of or come up with. It's important to do that when you're exploring things intellectually. Be like, what do I really know here? What am I really certain about? And then you try to build on that to comprehend an issue. If I were to ever get a big public platform, my rhetoric would very much include a crash course in critical thinking, because I don't think Americans do it very well. Anyway, let's get in. If you keep coming in the chat, but when I get flat, I'm going to go back to Powhatan, because this guy is a big deal. It sounds like you can go 2x speed. Oh, wait, here we go. Hold on.
Over the past 400 years.
Hold on, we got a chat. Anonymous bastard of society. ABS. Did you see the interview circulating of Trump talking about planes to take over New York and denaturalizing, deporting Zoran Mamdani? No to the planes, but yeah, I saw the denaturalizing, deporting Mamdani thing going on. He's probably waiting his time, but I wouldn't be surprised if Trump does it. You know, why not create chaos? He loves to create chaos. And you're no better way to do that than to take out the most important political figure in America's biggest city or most important city. I think LA actually for population is bigger than New York, but not plans. Oh, Trump's plans to take over New York. Oh, yeah, I didn't know plans to take over New York. I'm not sure about, but deporting Zoran definitely heard about. Um, yeah, Zoran's an amazing figure. He's incredibly talented. He seems to really know his stuff. He's got the fire. It's cool to see someone who's not a white man get pissed at a politician and still be taken seriously. So, Latina Mafune, if we introduce philosophy earlier into children's education, we can teach formal logic and critical thinking before they start taking lazy mental shortcuts. Yeah, I think educating kids is great to save the next generation and future generations, but we got to do something about the adults right now who don't have critical thinking skills. And I think that takes public figures who can communicate large quantities of information in short periods of time. You have to have highly skilled communicators within your political institution in order to really make a difference. And that's something that the left has been lacking. So, but back to what you're talking about, I think fundamentally you should be giving students with a lot of talent or who take learning seriously the opportunity to start focusing their education junior, senior year in high school and to start taking advanced classes so that they can get into their learning at a pace. Like you really hit your stride intellectually junior year in college. Like towards the end of sophomore year, beginning of junior year is when I started to really realize that I actually could think pretty well critically and come up with original thoughts and ideas about different subjects, which took a while for me because my classmates were so smart that I was like, well, I'm just an average guy in this crowd. But the crowd itself was pretty high level. So I eventually learned at the age of 16 or 17 that I was, fairly intelligent. And I think if I had been given the opportunity to study things like economics junior year, which I actually took an AP class my senior year, but study more like communication stuff, like you're talking about philosophy. In my communications major, I studied a lot of philosophy. I studied everybody from Nietzsche to, Aristotle, like all the big ones, Plato. But yeah, the philosophy, as I talk about in that essay, The Right Wing Magic Trick. I encourage you guys to check it out. In the Right Wing Magic Trick essay, I talk about how MAGA and conservatives in general are stupid in a specific way. They have very low existential IQ. Existential IQ is actually a thing, and it's the ability to reason through big questions like, why am I here? What am I supposed to do with my life? Yada, 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 right? Conservatives don't really do that. They don't really reflect on their lives. They're just surviving. They're just going from one moment to the next. So that's a good way of understanding conservatives. And you're right, Latina Mafuna. They would be well served by some serious education in philosophy and getting into formal logic and all that stuff. But I would also say just starting with the big questions because they don't have the answers. And we do this Christian tradition thing that is really disappointing because the Christian tradition is a patriarchal story, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. I mean, come on, unless the Holy Ghost is a female there, you're just talking about men being in charge. It's not complicated. Remember that. Always remember that. When it comes to understanding American culture, politics, and society, it's never as complicated as you think it is, right? You just got to think through it, and you got to ask good questions. That's really the key, I think, to being a good critical thinker, is knowing the right questions to ask. For example, when it comes to news media, who owns this channel? Who owns this media outlet? And what's their agenda? Latina Mafune, again, religions are lazy heuristic models most of the time. They sure are. They sure are. Religion in general used to do what science does now, which is explain natural phenomena. So there's a story in ancient Rome or ancient Greece, I'm pretty sure it's ancient Rome, where they see, like, they come up with a story about Apollo and the chariot's on fire or whatever. And it's because there was some sort of weird celestial thing that happened over Rome back in, like, 100 BC or something. And they needed a story to explain it because it kind of made people scared, most likely. So the religion is there to answer those big questions for them. They want someone higher up on the social hierarchy to give them the rhetorical ammunition to answer those questions in some sort of superficially, intellectually responsible way. But it doesn't work if you yourself know how to think critically, because conservatism is just superficial intellectualism. It's superficial thinking. It's the, like Latina Mufine is saying here, lazy. Lazy. Conservatism is lazy. And the other thing conservatism is, which I hope you guys can take with you into conversations, because simplicity is the essence of genius. Conservatism is fascism. Period. Conservatism will naturally devolve into fascism. It's just that simple. And if you want a building block for the sociocultural acceptance of fascism, look no further than the nuclear family. Credit Andrea Ravensky, who I just did a really fun collab with that you should check out. And her argument is that the nuclear family instills in us the belief that it's okay to have one, maybe two people in charge of everything, and they are just, or, and extrapolating that into societal context, a small number of people deciding everything, and that decision tree flows downward and tells everybody what to do. Back to Latina Mafune, humanity has to be better at developing structures of meaning that correspond with empirically verified reality. Yeah, that's true, but my question is always how? How are you going to do that? Leadership. This is one of my bigger points of advocacy right now for the left, is you have to distinguish between leaders, followers, and non-participants. You have to be able to separate the leaders from the followers on the left. Not everybody's cut out for leadership. In fact, less than 20%, I would say, of lefties are actually cut out to be leaders. Smaller number of that if you include liberals. But in general, people who, I'd say it's about 20% if you include liberals, maybe less than that, maybe 10%. But, I love the idea of equality. I love even more the idea of an equal opportunity society, because I think if you are more talented and you work harder, then you should be compensated better than people who are not as talented, who don't work as hard. But the point is that it's an equal opportunity society. So if you are average talented and work really hard, you can still live a very comfortable life, right? That's the kind of country that I want to live in. The question that Latino Mufene's comment begs is just how do we evolve as a society? That's just the overarching question. Again, Latino Mufene, forgive me if I'm oversimplifying what you're saying, but I'm just taking it in another direction and putting it into a context that ultimately serves the problem solving process. That's ultimately what I'm doing, is just trying to get us back to problems and solutions every time. Because America's not smart enough to have the isms conversation. That's the truth. That's the truth, is America is not smart enough to have the isms conversation. Keep the chats coming, guys. Keep the chats coming. I think we should go back to Powhatan. Keep the chats coming. I'm going back to my ancestor narrative. Powhatan, Paramount Chief of the Powhatan Confederacy.
The James River has experienced little change. A map published soon after 1607 shows only a slight difference in topography when compared to an aerial map from today. The inhabitants of the land surrounding the river, however, have changed drastically. Long before this map was drawn, the Powhatan lived here and relied on the natural resources of the river for transportation, food, and its streams of fresh water. It was important to the Powhatan to be near a river. Much of their life depended on it. Many lived along what is today called the James River. The native peoples referred to rivers as Yeokanta, and the James was then named the Powhatan Flue. The Powhatan stayed close to the James River, though its main body was too brackish to drink. The river was a source of transportation and food. The Powhatan inhabited the areas of Virginia from the Tidewater to Fall Line regions. There were other tribes around them, maintaining a distance of about 3 days' travel. The Susquehannocks, Massawomacs, and the Patawomecs to the north, the Monacans and Manahoacs to the west, and the Chowan to the south, as well as many other smaller tribes. The Powhatan chiefdom had originally been smaller groups, but were united under a central chief called the Mamanatowic by the late 1500s. By the middle of the 16th century, Chief Powhatan, named at birth Wahun Seneca, had come to power. But how? Powhatan's mother was born at Pamunkey, in what is today King William County. His father was from the town of Powhatan, at the falls of the James River. Some have speculated a series of chiefly marriages between the river communities gave rise to the original Powhatan-Pamunkey chiefdom, to include the geography that is today considered the greater Richmond area. Wahun Seneca inherited his position of power through his mother's Pamunkey lineage and became chief about 1565. In some societies, lineage descent determines power, that a particular family holds the leadership of a community. For the matrilineal Powhatan, chiefly power always moved from mother to child, and then passing to each sibling according to birth order. When all siblings were dead, the oldest daughter's child would receive power through the matriline. The Powhatan spoke Algonquian, a language family widespread in North America, but did not have a written language, so messages had to be sent in person.
So this is the biggest unknown, I think, about the ancient Native American tribes, is that they were highly organized, and the biggest evidence of that is their consolidation of language over the North American East Coast. It was pretty impressive. Algonquin really united the Native American tribes and put into place a power structure that actually benefited the Native Americans at the time.
Travel might be done on foot, but the quickest way to get anywhere was on the river. Werowances, or village and lineage headmen, traditionally governed local communities, but offered tribute to the great Powhatan. Some Werowances were appointed. Werowances would send news as well as goods to Powhatan. Through tribute, all parts of the chiefdom showed their loyalty to their Mamanatowic. Some goods might come from other tribes or regions, making them valuable for their scarcity. When Powhatan was home, he would have taken part in daily life. That life began every day with the river. Each morning, all the Powhatan Indian men would go down to the river to bathe, regardless of age or time of year. Paint, made of natural dyes and bear grease, would be removed and reapplied. Villages were kept near the river. They wanted their source for fresh water, riverine resources, and travel nearby. Women would build the yehakens, or homes, sometimes called longhouses, from saplings and rushes cut by the river. The woven mats would cover the house and provide shelter. These homes were sturdy, but could be torn down and moved in a matter of days. This allowed the Powhatan Indians the flexibility to plant their crops in fertile soil and move as needed when fields were exhausted. The men's space was in the forest, hunting or making war. When men returned from the hunt, they were entering women's territory. Powhatan men were often away from home. Bringing food to the village was their responsibility. One source of abundant food was the river. Fishermen would come home with oysters, mussels, fish, and birds. Land animals depended on the river for water too, so there were many animals to hunt. The Powhatan men were very skilled with bows and arrows. The woods provided a strong hunter with bear, deer, rabbit, and many other animals. This reliance on the land meant that the Powhatan diet changed in substance and amount depending on the season. Once the animal was brought to the village, the job of processing it fell to the women. The tendons, brains, bones, hooves, and skin would all be used. Hides could be made into leather using the animal's own brain. A chemical called tannin kept the skin from rotting. The result would be wearable, useful leather. Any extra meat would be smoked to preserve it. In winter, or Papanao, the Powhatan Indians would eat dried or smoked meat and crops that had been preserved earlier that year. In 1611, English colonists came up the river. Men from Jamestown, suffering from continual illness and hunger, looked for a new site to settle, ultimately creating Henricus. In the land, they found exactly what Native Americans had found hundreds of years before: fresh water, plentiful land, and natural protection. Only one thing stood in their way. The Powhatan's ability to live on the land's natural resources was very impressive to the Jamestown and Henricus colonists. Chief Powhatan did not worry over the few Englishmen, or Tassan Tassas, that arrived in the villages to trade, or who had settled on small pieces of uninhabited land. He worried more over the Monacans, who acted occasionally as partners in trade, but more often as enemies. Initially, Powhatan may have thought that the English were temporary visitors, potential allies, and useful trading partners. Around the time Jamestown was being founded, a Powhatan priest made a prediction, which was retold by Englishman William Strachey in his History of Travel. From the Chesapeake Bay, a nation should arise, which should dissolve and give end to his empire. A second prophecy said that twice they should give overthrow and dishearten the attempters and such strangers as should invade their territories or labor to settle a plantation amongst them. But the third time, they themselves should fall into their subjection and under their conquest. To avert the first prediction, Powhatan crushed the Chesapeake, Kecoughtan, and Piankatank Indians. The second prediction was thought to be about the Monacans, but came true if applied to the outsiders, the Tassan Tassas, the English. The English and the Powhatan Indians did coexist, but their relationship could always turn tense. They had common qualities that helped cross-cultural understanding, but also strong characters of difference. The Powhatan had their chief. The English had their king. The king depended on his colony's governors, the chief on his werowances. The English were monotheistic, meaning they worshipped one supreme deity. The English worshipped God using a Bible and personal prayer. However, the Powhatan worshipped multiple spirit forces through the guidance of their priests, including two named Ahon and Okios. The English erected their forts and struggled to succeed in this new world. Their houses were able to withstand Virginia's weather, but they relied heavily on goods they received. These goods arrived on ships from England and from local tribes. They brought goods that seemed wonderful to the Indians, goods that enhanced status and trading opportunities, though they were not necessary. What the Indians offered was even more wonderful: food. The Indians traded for things they wanted, but the English traded for things they needed. Some items, such as animal pelts, would be traded with the hope of selling them in England, but with unreliable ships and harsh winters, the English needed Powhatan corn and meat to survive. The two cultures occasionally mingled. English men or boys lived with the Powhatan in order to learn their language and act as interpreters.
Okay,
and
so
Powhatan
this
boys
is who
were
my
sent to the
ancestor
English.
was.
Prisoners.
This only happened with 3 people. That he's just talked about, he just mentioned. So hold on one second, let me get this right.
The two cultures occasionally mingled. English men or boys lived with the Powhatan in order to learn their language and act as interpreters. And English men or boys lived with the Powhatan in order to learn their language and act as interpreters.
So that was only 3 boys that got able to do that. One was my ancestor, Tom Savage. Another was a guy named Henry Spellman, who showed up about 18 months after Savage did. And then there was Sam Collier, or Collier, and he came in towards the end, right before the war broke out, the first Powhatan War broke out. So my ancestors showed up at Jamestown, and in less than a month, or in a little bit over a month, he was living with Powhatan and his family and learning their customs, and he was the first one to do it. So Tom Savage, he didn't actually have a last name, but they called him Savage because he went to go live with the Savages, obviously an unfortunate term, but that's what they called him. And so that's his name, Tom Savage.
And Powhatan boys were sent to the English. Prisoners were taken and sometimes assimilated into the new culture. One such prisoner was Pocahontas, daughter of Chief Powhatan. She was forced to live among the English and learned the language and customs. Pocahontas converted.
She was kidnapped and then forced to do all this shit, like convert to Christianity or whatever. And she had a soft spot for the English colonists, and they took advantage of it.
She was forced to live among the English and learned the language and customs. Pocahontas converted to Christianity and took the name Rebecca. She ultimately married the planter John Rolfe and visited England, where she died and was buried. Pocahontas became a...
It was really tragic. Right before Pocahontas was, or really they got on the boat to come back to America from England, and then she got sick, so they pulled over to this town called Gravesend, I think it's called, and she died there of an unknown illness. It was probably tuberculosis or something. I don't know exactly what it was, but Pocahontas is a really tragic figure in American history, and it's a shame that Trump kind of co-opted the name Pocahontas by insulting Liz Warren, but Liz Warren kind of invited it by claiming she was part Native American when she's not.
Popular connection between the two cultures. The English planted their settlements, expanded their croplands, particularly that of tobacco, and stayed, adding more people as ships kept arriving. Their continued growth edged the Powhatan out of their own territory. The Powhatan eventually realized fighting back was their only option. In 1618, Chief Powhatan died.
Yeah, but that was after the first Powhatan
His
War.
brother, Opichepam, became the new chief, but his brother, Opi Chankano, soon stepped into the role. Opi Chankano actively fought against the English encroachment, starting in March
Right,
of
so that's
16
different.
into the role. Opichepam became the new chief, but his brother, Opi Chankano, soon stepped into the role. Opi Chankano actively fought against the English encroachment, starting in March of 1622 with a great assault that decimated the colonists.
So it's weird how they
War
haven't
raged for a
mentioned
decade
this, but there was
thereafter.
another war. This is the second Powhatan War. The first war was 1609 to 1612 or something, and then they had like 10 years of peace, and then they had another war.
The people
But
of
this war was plotted. This war took a couple years to formulate a game plan for, it sounds like.
the river continued to move, trying to live away from the English, but their lifestyle required land and access to the river's resources. The English made that riverside land unavailable and populated it quickly, and Powhatan communities were forced to adapt. The Powhatan village of Erohatek, located near where Richmond is today, disappeared from historical documents shortly after the English arrived and established Henricus. Little is known about where they went, but they likely merged with the neighboring communities. The 1600s, a time of exploration and colonization of Virginia for the English, saw the end of Native Americans' isolation from Europe. Disease, warfare, and enslavement followed, destroying indigenous people and their societies. Of the Powhatan people that survived, all were eventually assimilated into the English colony. The mighty James River that had brought them so many resources was also the waterway that the colonization of English-speaking America followed. Remarkably, even through 400 years of assimilation and changes, descendant communities of the Powhatan Indians remain today and are part of Virginia society. There are 2 reservations on the Mattapony and Pamunkey rivers, and the Commonwealth is home to 9 other state-recognized tribes.
Yeah, but there's not many of them left. Not many of them left, unfortunately. All right, anything else coming in chat, guys? I'm going to sign off if you guys don't hook me up with some chat things to talk about. Yeah, we talked about that. Latina Mafune, I'm starting the conversation about how to get there, talking about more evolved society with superior educational opportunities for people to understand how we got here, why we're here, what we can do about it in terms of improving society. I think we have to offer better existential institutional answers along with the bread and butter solutions to mature the popular consensus. Yes, but the solutions come first. The solutions come first. People don't care how you deliver, just as long as you deliver. So we got to get some wins in the form of something, anything along FDR's second Bill of Rights: healthcare, housing, education, employment, farmers' rights, and Social Security. Sounds good to me. So that's probably going to be it today. 45 minutes, a lot longer than I expected to go. That was fun. Hope you guys enjoyed it. That's a little bit of my ancestry. Probably my most interesting ancestor, Tom Savage, was his name. Oh, has your run for vice governor started yet, or is it still planning? Oh, so yeah, there was a hot minute where I was thinking about running for lieutenant governor of California, but I am not going to be doing that. No, I'm not going to go into details, but there are a bunch of reasons, some of which are personal, for why I shouldn't do that. There's another office that I have in mind, a smaller office, but I've got some time to figure that out. ABS. I will keep you apprised of my goings on there. But it's going to be, a little bit of time, man. Like I'm talking, 1 to 2 years, 3 years before you really get some information about that, unless things break a really certain special way over the next couple of months. But I don't see it happening. Thank you, Latina Mufune. She's great. I appreciate all the support. Anything else? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And definitely don't forget that you don't get change in America by asking nicely. Thanks for watching. We will see you next time.